Welcome to Playfully Orange, our conversations about arts and culture here in Central Florida. And my guest today is Alice Fairfax. Hello, Alice.
Hello, Terry.
Alice, you have been around and involved with the arts for some decades now, ever since you graduated from
Yes,
college. So,
yes. And even while I was in college at Rollins, you see my little picture of the Annie Russell behind me.
so
So that's been since the 80s. That's been since the 80s. I actually gave a talk to a bunch of Rollins students this past week. And I was like, so when I was here, I think when I was on the stage in 1986, and their eyes were like, what? What does that even mean?
let's find a little bit about you and where you came from. How did you get on the stage? What brought you to there?
Yeah, I think growing up, I was just always an artsy kid. I started playing the piano when I was 5. I had one of those little think, think, think pianos, and my parents saw me trying to play it to a record from ear. And so they were like, "Oh, okay." So I started taking piano lessons, started taking ballet and dance lessons when I was a little girl. And then my dad was in the Navy, so we moved around. So then the arts were a really, really good way for me to connect, to join the choir, to join the dance troupe. And that just all led to theater, really, because I can sing and I can dance, and acting it was easier and probably a better fit for me. And then that led to writing because really once my son was born, I really couldn't go out at night. It wasn't really theater is a nighttime gig, and I just couldn't do that. I couldn't. I needed to be where he was, and so writing allowed me to do that.
And what have you been writing?
Well, I just this fall, November 2023, published my second book, which is called Tell Your Story: Tools to Take You from a Tweet to a TED Talk. And that is really it's
Tweet to TED Talk.
tweet to a TED Talk. Yes. I think we still use tweet as a verb. Uh, even though Twitter is no longer. But it really came from the seminars and workshops that I was leading, mostly to nonprofits, sometimes to small business leaders, about how to use the power of story and how to engage your audience. Because you and I know from our background in audience participation theater, you learn very, very quickly what engages an audience. Because when you're doing live theater I was on the street at Epcot for over 20 years. And that face-to-face interaction, if you aren't engaging them, they walk away. Um, and so you learn what works. And so I kind of developed a lot of those tools into workshops to help nonprofit leaders, especially who have to get up. A lot of nonprofit leaders, some in the arts know how to get up, but if you're the donor relations person, maybe that's not really your background, is getting up and speaking to an audience. And how do I do that? And how do I do that in an engaging way, especially if I'm in the arts, in an arts nonprofit? Do I need to be funny? Do I need to put on a performance at all times? How do I convey that information? And so I lead those workshops. And so I put it all into this book, so you can have it in your hands now.
That's your second book, you said. Now, what's the first book?
Yes. The first book is, if you can see it behind me, that's called The Creative Life. And I wrote that in 1999, early 2000s. And it's really a Bible study and a creativity handbook come together, because that was a time when the church and the culture were wrestling. The
Like they're
church
not
was
anymore?
no, but it's a different wrestle, totally different wrestle now. But in the early 2000s, the question about creativity and the church was creativity valuable? Was art valuable? Could people be creative? I was out at Epcot at the time, and I was at a large church, at Northland Church in Longwood, and everybody at church would come up to me and say, "Oh my gosh, I wish I could be creative like you." And then everybody at work would come up to me and say, "Oh my gosh, I wish I could have a spiritual life like you." And I was like, I don't get, how is this not going together? This goes together so well for me. And so I basically decided to put a book together where you could explore your spirituality, explore what the Bible says, do some creativity exercises, and put that all together.
Have you written other things?
I've written a lot of articles and I blog still a lot. And then I was a script writer at Disney Event Group for a long time. And so I do a lot of background writing. I'm writing now for a company that I work for in Bangkok, Thailand. I'm helping them write their stories for their theme destinations. So I do a lot of kind of the behind the scenes writing that my name wouldn't be on.
Okay. And how about acting? Are you doing that?
I don't do that anymore, really.
I mean, like on a stage.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Not in my personal life. No, I really don't. The last thing that I did was with Central Florida Community Arts. I did Oklahoma with them. And I keep thinking it was like a year ago, but I think it was like 10, probably 10 years ago or something like that. I do a lot of workshops and facilitating. And so that feels like performing for me, but also for there's so many, I'm sure, in your audience that have been or are theme park performers. I was at Universal for 7 years, did 13 shows a day there, 5 days a week. I was at Disney for over 20 years, did 5 shows a day, 8 shows a day. I feel pretty good, pretty full up there. Don't really feel, I never thought I'd be like, oh, I don't need to be on stage anymore, but I really don't.
Well, you are on stage when you're doing your presentations.
That's true.
So
That's true.
it's just it's a one person show. So
Yes.
well, how did you come to Rollins from somewhere else? You said you'd moved around a lot.
Yes, my dad came here for the Navy base. The what is now Baldwin Park was a Navy base. And so this was his final post before he retired. He was one of the commanders of the Navy base. There were 3 commanders at the time. There would be an admiral and 2 captains, and he was the captain that was in charge of the administrative command, which would be like the operations, the vice president of operations
Right.
in any of our worlds. And so that's where he ended his career. And I was 16 when we got here. And we came from Stockholm, Sweden. And I just thought this was great. I thought the palm trees and the warm weather and the sun all the time was a real good thing. And I didn't want to leave. So I went to Rollins from Winter Park High School.
Well, from the perspective of having lived various places, including overseas, and from the perspective of more than 3 decades here, first of all, what was your early perceptions of arts and culture, and what have you seen since then?
Yeah, when I first got here, there really wasn't an arts and culture scene that I could see. And most importantly, there were some things. There was a civic theater, community theater, but there wasn't any professional theater. So I knew when I graduated from Rollins, I had to leave. I would have to leave if I wanted to have a profession. And I went to New York for some time, and it just wasn't the right place for me. So I had in my mind a regional theater, that's where I wanted to be. And so I was looking all over the country for regional theaters. And I just wanted to stay here. I really wanted to be here. And so my first job out of college was actually working for you as your assistant. And we were trying to start a regional theater, and we ultimately did. But then I've gone on and helped other theaters start. SAC Theater Comedy Lab, I was part of the launch of that. I was part of helping you and the team for the first Fringe Festival here that was born out of SAC Theater Comedy Lab. So and Orlando Shakespeare Festival, I worked with them on occasion. And so it was really about building places that I could work. And ultimately that happened once the theme parks opened up for actors. Then a lot of actors flooded into town, and then we were able to do more because we just had so much more talent and so many more people that wanted exactly what I wanted, which was a place to work.
And you did some Renaissance festivals with SAC?
Yes, sure. Yeah, Minnesota, Michigan. I think I did Kansas City one year.
I just finished last night reading a book called The History of American Renaissance Festivals.
Wow.
And it has various mentions of SAC and Herbie specifically.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you'd be interested in that.
Yeah, I kind of came into SAC theater just as SAC was making a transformation from doing that Renaissance fair stuff and doing the Walt Disney stuff into doing the improv. So I'm kind of always the youngest of our generation of SACtors, me and Joel McCrary. We're the babies, but now we're in our mid 50s. But so I got to do a little bit of the Renaissance fair, but that kind of training, of that interaction and engagement with the audience, was so valuable to me. I just love it still so much. And
Right.
for me, it was the structure of having a story and then improvising within that structure that was what really got me charged. And I feel like my entire career, all of my writing, all of my workshops is based on that concept, that there is a structure and inviting people into that structure, and the structure is story based. And so, thank you to you and Herbie for including me in that.
Thank you for joining me today for our little chat about arts and culture and about Alice Fairfax here on Playfully Orange.